Good Yontif. The next time you are in Israel, which I hope for all of us is very soon, I want you to look at the portraits on every shekel bill. Unlike American currency, which features presidents and statesmen, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Hamilton, the banknotes of Israel bear the faces of Israel's great poets and literary giants, Rachel Bluestein, Shaul Chernyakhovsky, Leah Goldberg, and on the largest 200 shekel bill, and our poetic guide for today, Natan Alterman. Their words are woven into the story of the nation and its land, literally and figuratively, the currency in which Israel's soul is accounted. Born in Warsaw in 1910, Natan Alterman immigrated with his family to the young city of Tel Aviv in 1925. In the Mandate period, some of Alterman's poems were banned by British censors, yet eagerly copied and passed hand to hand by the public. Translator, journalist, playwright, and songwriter, over the course of his lifetime, Alterman received nearly every literary prize Israel has to offer, including, just before his passing in 1970, the Israel Prize for Lifetime Achievement in Literature. While many of his works are lyrical in nature, it was through his political verse, printed every Friday in his newspaper column, Hatur Hashvi'i, the seventh column, that became Alterman's way of becoming Israel's poetic conscience. Two of his poems, written 1 year apart in the heat of Israel's 47-48 founding struggle, spoke with searing urgency at the time and speak just as urgently to us today. The first poem is perhaps his most famous of all. In Hebrew, Magash HaKesef, in English, The Silver Platter. The poem portrays a young man and woman at moonlight, exhausted from battle, dressed in army gear, bone-weary from days and nights on the battlefield. I won't read it all, but the poem concludes, when the nation asks in tears, Mi atem, who are you? The young partisans answer, Anachnu magash hakesef, asher alav nitna lachem medinat hayehudim. We are the silver platter upon which the Jewish state was presented. The key to understanding the poem lies in its date of publication, December 19th, 1947. Just 3 weeks earlier, on November 29th, the UN partition plan was announced. In the days that followed, 120 Jews were killed, a catastrophic toll at any time, all the more so in those vulnerable pre-state days. On one very bloody December 9th, 6 Jews were murdered near the village of Shuat in the Negev, among them 2 teenagers, Miriam Shachor and Asaf Shachnai, slaughtered in cold blood, chased down and left in a ditch. Their funeral was attended by thousands in Tel Aviv, including Alterman himself. Chaim Weizmann, soon to be Israel's first president, was in America that December, raising funds for the nascent state. Hearing of the trauma back home, on December 13th, he declared to his audience in Atlantic City, as reported in the New York Times, no state has been handed to us on a silver platter. The turn of phrase reached Israel and was translated into Hebrew by the Israeli press, becoming ironically the English seed for Israel's most famous national poem. The poem transformed Alterman into Israel's comforter-in-chief. The young man and woman in the poem rising from the mists are Miriam and Asaf, and every other soul killed in defense of the Jewish homeland. Jewish self-determination would come, promised Alterman, but not with pomp and ceremony, but by way of the lives of the youth, the sacrificial silver platter. Set to music, engraved onto Israeli postage stamps, recited every Memorial Day, there is hardly a national commemoration without Magash HaKesef being sung or read. Israel's poetic monument to the sacrifice of their brave young men and women. The second poem is less well known, for reasons which will become self-evident. It is called Al Zot, which means for this, classical biblical language when Israel is summoned to account. Al Zot was published nearly 1 year after Magash HaKesef, on November 19th, 1948, 6 months after Ben-Gurion had declared Israel's independence. This was a new chapter of war. On the one hand, Israel had found its footing. On the other hand, the harsh and bloody cycles of wartime violence were tragically present on both sides. The displacements of Palestinian Arabs in October's Operation Yoav and the killing of Palestinian Arabs in Al-Dawayima, the dream of Jewish sovereignty confronted with the nightmare of what war can make one become. Scholarly consensus holds that Yitzhak Sadeh, the Haganah's then chief of staff, and the man who invented the IDF doctrine of purity of arms, having learned of the dark deeds committed by Jewish soldiers, reported the terrible events to Alterman, who then wrote a poem that brought them to light. Al Zot is a searing indictment of the moral costs, blind spots, and overreaches that accompanied the war. Alterman describes in the poem an Israeli soldier. Mounted on a jeep, he had crossed the conquered city. An old man and a woman were pressed on the wall, and the lad smiled with milk-white teeth. "I will try the machine gun." And he tried. The old man just covered his face with his hands, and his blood covered the wall. Friends, this is a snapshot of the Battle of Freedom. Milchamtenu tovaat bitui veshirim tov. Yusharla im ken gam al zot. Our war demands to be expressed in song. Fine, then sing of it. But if so, sing also of this. Alterman had become Israel's mirror of conscience. The power of the poem, which I've only offered the smallest fragment, lying not just in the horrific truths it names, but in its leveraging of classical prophetic language onto Israel itself. The seismic impact of Al Zot went wider and deeper than its publication that Friday afternoon. Among those who read it that Shabbat was Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion. How would Ben-Gurion respond to such a public accounting during wartime? Would he suppress it? Dismiss Alterman from his post? That Sunday morning, November 21st, 1948, Ben-Gurion wrote the following letter to Alterman. Dear Alterman, Yasher Koach, for the moral authority and strength of expression in your last column in Devar. You became the mouthpiece, a pure and true mouthpiece to human conscience. If this conscience will not act and beat in our hearts in these days, we shall not be worthy of the great things we have achieved so far. I have asked your permission to print this column. No armored column in our arsenal can surpass it for fighting might, to be published by the Ministry of Defense and distributed to every military man in Israel. With gratitude and appreciation, David Ben-Gurion. And Ben-Gurion did exactly that. 100,000 copies of Alterman's poem and Ben-Gurion's letter distributed to every IDF soldier. The poem and Ben-Gurion's response serving as a reminder that a people's true strength lies not only in its columns of tanks, but in its columns of conscience. To this day, the litmus test of Israel's ability to uphold the ethical dimensions of securing its safety without losing its soul. Alterman's poems are the spiritual index of Israel's patriotic repertoire. I've left copies of the poems in the back. These two poems reflecting not only two distinct chapters of Israel's War of Independence, but also two starkly different realities of war. Magash HaKesef, Israel's de facto poem of national sacrifice, Al zot, the moral accounting, the cheshbon hanefesh that war demands. Alterman himself would come to see them as companion pieces. Years later, when his published poems were in a single volume, he insisted that Magash HaKesef and Al Zot appear not in chronological order, but side by side, compelling the reader to confront the multiple truths that come with war. When we arrive in this room on Yom Kippur, the language of prayer provides us the index of our existence. Depending on the prayer book, Mi Yom Kippurim Shavar ad Yom Kippurim Hazeh, Mi Yom Kippurim Zeh ad Yom Kippurim Haba. From last Yom Kippur until this Yom Kippur, from this Yom Kippur until next Yom Kippur. In our own lives, in our families, and our people, where were we this time last year? Where are we this year? And then what steps do we need to take to get to that place where we want to be next year? Like two poems written a year apart, but printed side by side, so to us, the rhythms, rituals, and prayers of the day alerting us to the passage of time and the changed realities in which we live. No matter your personal politic, and imperfect as the analogy may be, as a community invested in the people and state of Israel, it's hard to miss the parallels between Alterman's year and our own. In the words of Prime Minister Netanyahu, this is our second war of independence. In the aftermath of the horrific October 7th attacks, all Israelis rallied to Israel's defense. Even the government's fiercest critics understood that it was a time to set differences aside, to comfort the bereaved, to secure the defense of the Jewish state, and to fight for the release of the hostages. There's a Hebrew expression, ten gav, literally give your back, meaning to lend your strength. Every Israeli was called on to ten gav to a son, a daughter, a sibling, a grandchild, heading to the front. Those murdered that day, those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the days that followed, the displaced, the plight of the hostages, they are, in Alterman's words, the new silver platter upon which the Jewish state is secured and sustained. And this Yom Kippur, the oaths, vows, affirmations, pleas, and protests rising out of Israel are different than they were a year ago. There have been, to be sure, stunning battlefield achievements against Hamas, against Hezbollah, in Syria, against Iran, and beyond. When I was in Israel this past summer on a UJA solidarity mission, sobering as it was to witness the damage inflicted on Israel, I was even more struck by how catastrophic it would have been were it not for the strength of Israel's military made possible by way of American support. Since October 7th, Israel has done yeoman's work towards securing its short-term and long-term security. And while all may agree on these achievements, within Israel itself, there's anything but consensus on a host of other issues, and we're all watching the news very closely. With 48 hostages still in captivity, shall Israel prioritize their release or seek total victory over Hamas, if such a victory is even attainable? Many Israelis view the use of military pressure as an impediment, not an instrument, toward the hostages' release, with some hostage parents accusing the government of Jews sending Jews to kill Jews. On Israeli news the other day, I saw the story of one combat mother, Shiri Kenner, who drove down to her son's tank base to physically prevent him from returning to the front. The incalculable psychological toll a 2-year war takes, not only on soldiers themselves, but on their families, young men and women sent into battle by a government shaped by its most extreme elements, a government that has long since abandoned the possibility of Israeli-Palestinian coexistence. As for Gaza, given the combination of an insulated Israeli media and a self-insulated Israeli society, it's unclear how much Israelis know or want to know about the impact of IDF operations on Palestinian lives. And while I am disinclined to accept the numbers, narrative, or nomenclature as offered by the New York Times, NPR, and otherwise, I also know that one need not be an expert in international law to recognize that there are serious and seriously bad things happening in Gaza, the death, displacement, and devastation of Palestinian life and living. Based on what I hear from my own family and friends with children serving in the IDF, the prevailing posture seems to be hug your child tightly, give thanks that they are alive, ask them no questions, attend a rally reflecting one's politics, and defer the final moral reckoning to a future day. I do not know what Alterman's Alzot would say if it were written today. I only know that if he were to write, he would urge Israel to take a hard look at itself in the mirror. He would insist that such soul-searching, the quintessential activity of today, need not be mistaken for weakness or fodder for our enemies or internal divisions, but as an essential act of renewal, the path by which Israel restores both its moral compass and its national strength. This is, best as I can make out, the divided soul of Israel, not the Israel of last Yom Kippur, nor for that matter the Israel portrayed in the media in which the prime minister is some kind of dictator without strong grassroots support. The Israeli consensus remains in lockstep that Hamas must never again be capable of inflicting another October 7th. The Israeli soul that is exhausted and waiting to exhale, mustering resolve even as it fights for survival and legitimacy as it continues to nurse open wounds. The Israeli soul upon which every Saturday night hostage rallies and anti-government protests begin with a moment of silence and prayer for soldiers and ends with the singing of Hatikva, Israel's national anthem. The Israeli soul where parents of fallen soldiers and slain hostages recite Kaddish, shoulder to shoulder, a national soul holding the platter of sacrifice and the moral reckoning of Alzot at one and the same time. And if this is how Alterman felt, and how Israelis feel now, should it be any surprise that we too, as a community invested in Israel with every fiber of our being, should also wrestle with these self-same feelings? If I had to name the malady of our age, it would be the mythically seductive and corrosively simplistic fiction that to be a Jew demands a monolithic voice, uniform identity, and uncritical loyalty. No person is any one thing. We are all compound creatures, adjacent, overlapping, sometimes competing poems bound together in a single volume. It's a truth that holds in every aspect of our being, the love we hold for our children, for our family, for our country, and as Jews who stand with Israel. We do ourselves immeasurable damage when we press one another into false choices to be Israel's fiercest critic or Israel's fiercest defender, that Israel is always right or Israel is always wrong. Such binaries are a toxic distortion of reality. They do not reflect Israel, they do not reflect our love for Israel, and they do not reflect how love or life actually works. A human being with only one principle or one value is a diminished human being. For as long as Jews have been Jews, our calling has been to hold multiple and competing loves and commitments in our minds and hearts at one and the same time. Consider Abraham, the hero of these high holidays, who argues with God on behalf of the wicked inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. Will you, God, really sweep away the righteous and the wicked? Immediately thereafter, Abraham must choose between the well-being of his handmaiden Hagar and the demands of his wife Sarah. And then, in the most harrowing test of all, he is commanded to choose between his love of God and his love of his son. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him as a sacrifice. Sometimes Abraham tilts one way, sometimes the other. The point is not any single decision, but in the through line that connects them all. A life spent wrestling with the tension itself. The sages note that Noah walked with God while Abraham walked lifnei, before God. Why the difference? Because when Noah had to build his ark, he hopped on it with the animals. When God declared judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham argued back. He lost the point, but he argued, and that is the point. It's why he, unlike Noah, walked lifnei, before God. That is the essence of what it means to be an Ivri, a descendant of Abraham. It is a through line that begins with Abraham, that runs through our people right up to today. On Yom Kippur afternoon, we will read of Jonah, also an Ivri, sent to save Nineveh, not just a wicked city, but the very capital of Israel's enemy. They too, God reminds Jonah, are the objects of divine concern. God holds multiple concerns, and so must Jonah, and so must we. It's a sentiment captured best in the famed aphorism of Hillel the sage, Im ein ani li, mi li, ukasha'ani la'atzmi, ma ani. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, then what am I? The essence of Jewish identity is not found in one clause or the other, but in the breath, the neshama taken between. There, in that neshama, lies the soul of the Jew and the soul of the Jewish people. And I get it. It is hard. It is hard to hold that breath. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? The hostages remain captive. Our enemies are unrepentant. Our soldiers' lives are at risk. Israel is isolated on the world stage. Candidates for mayor are scandalously unable to call out anti-Semitic language, let alone affirm Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. What business of mine is it to care about, never mind allocate tzedakah to the inhabitants of Gaza with a knife to our neck? Is now really the time to look at that moral mirror. On one of my visits to Israel this year, I met with a leader of Israel's protest movement, a man who has repeatedly stood up against the prime minister regarding what he sees as real threats to Israel's democracy. I asked him about the sufferings of Palestinians in Gaza. His reply to me, "Give me back my hostages and then ask me about Gaza." Love, he was telling me, is a finite commodity. To be a Jew, to be anything for that matter, is to prioritize one love over another. If I am not for myself, then who will be for me? That is what it means to be an Ivri, a descendant of Abraham. And I get it. If I am only for myself, then what am I? To stand by Israel is to carry the weight of a love tested. We see the sufferings of Gaza. We see the policies coming from Israel's governing coalition. We ask how we can support a government led that does not reflect our hopes for Israel. Last month, in our synagogue's Get Out the Vote meeting, one committee member suggested, given the stakes of the mayoral election, that we encourage our college students to register to vote in New York City and not Michigan, Ohio, or Pennsylvania, or wherever it is they go to school. Another parent responded, "Who's to say that our kids will vote how we want them to vote? Better they stay registered to vote where they are." And it's not just our kids who are asking the tough questions of Israel. It's many people in this room. Lest we forget, the same angel who saved Isaac on the altar was the angel who saved Ishmael in the wilderness. The divine measure of empathy does not stand for particularism. When Jacob trembled before Esau, the rabbis teach, his fear was twofold: fear that he might be killed and fear that he might have to kill. If I am only for myself, then what am I? That too is what it means to be an Ivri, a descendant of Abraham. I get it. Believe me, I do. It is hard enough to hold one side, never mind both sides at the same time. But this is not a zero-sum game. Somewhere along the way, we've convinced ourselves that love of Israel requires the absence of empathy, or that the demands of empathy ask us to forsake Israel. Somewhere along the way, we've fallen into the trap of believing that unconditional love means uncritical love, or that honest critique is somehow incompatible with what it means to love. Anybody who lives in a family knows that this is not so. Real love, real commitment is not blind. If Alterman could write Magash HaKesef and then write Al Zot, if Ben-Gurion could send Israel's army into battle and then distribute copies of Al Zot to every soldier, then why do we find it so hard to hold both truths at once? With hundreds of thousands of Israelis protesting every week, calling for the hostages' release, calling for a ceasefire, calling for governmental accountability, how dare we exclude those who would do the same here from the community of the committed? With thousands of soldiers making daily sacrifices, and far too often the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of our 8 million brothers and sisters, how dare we turn our backs on our people at this critical hour? As one Israeli said to me recently, a friend, after pouring out his fury at every misstep, mistake, and failure that the government committed before October 7th, on October 7th, and 6 October 7th, he said, "Don't walk away from us. We need you," meaning diaspora Jewry more than ever. Your voice, your support, your critique, and your love is more important than ever. Love of Israel, like any love, means living inside its complexity. Earlier this summer, another friend of mine, a person of unimpeachable character and towering scholarship, who exists at the leftmost edges of Jewish politics, challenged me, asking, "Elliot, what exactly would Israel have to do? How grave of a sin would it have to commit for you to walk away?" I reject the question. As long as I live, I will not walk away from Israel. And as long as I am your rabbi, neither will this congregation. I could no more separate myself from Israel than I can from the air I breathe. If there is an answer to my friend, it is this: I will work harder. I will double down. I will defend Israel in its hour of need, as I have. I will fight for the release of the hostages, as I have. I will call for an end to this war, as I have. I will critique Israel when it strays, when it overreaches, when it risks losing its identity as a Jewish and democratic state, as I have. I will call out the pernicious blurring of line between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism from the right and from the left, as I have. I will continue to lead and seed efforts in our congregation and community aimed at encouraging bridges and partnerships between diaspora Jewry and Israel, as I have. And I will continue to affirm the right of Palestinian self-determination because it's their right, because we were once strangers in a strange land, and because, as a Zionist, I believe that Israel's security is bound up with their self-determination. I will do all of this, and I will do more. Why? Because I love Israel, and I will do it all from within the camp of the committed, not in contradistinction to my being a Jew, but as the very expression of it. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, then what am I? This is a dialectical balance that defines Jewish identity: self-concern and concern for the other, love and self-critique, held in perpetual tension. You may disagree with the person sitting next to you. You may disagree with me. The promise of this community is not unanimity of opinion or uniformity of expression. The promise, the challenge, and the sacred task of this community is to hold ourselves together as we hold the well-being of Israel as our shared and urgent goal, even when, and especially when, we may disagree on the tactics by which we seek to achieve that goal. As Ben-Gurion once remarked concerning Britain's white paper restrictions upon Jewish immigration to Palestine as Hitler was conquering Europe, he would fight the white paper as if there were no Hitler, and he would fight Hitler as if there were no white paper. There is never only one threat, and there is never only one value, so too for us. We hold both at one and the same time as an expression of the love of Israel we share. For Alterman, for Israel, for me, for you, ultimately the heart of Hillel's teaching is not in the first clause, and it's not in the second, nor even in the breath between the two. It's the third clause, the one that at first feels like an afterthought. Ve'im lo achshav, ematai. If not now, then when? To act with urgency, to act with agency, to believe that now is the time to express a love for Israel infused with justice and compassion, advocacy and accountability, and to know that to do so is not a betrayal of our nature, but is our nature and our very glory. It is, if you stop to think about it, what today, Yom Kippur, is actually all about. A candid reckoning, not just with the other, but with ourselves. Mi Yom Kippurim Shavar ad Yom Kippurim Hazeh, Mi Yom Kippurim Zeh ad Yom Kippurim Haba. From last Yom Kippur until this Yom Kippur, from this Yom Kippur until next Yom Kippur, may each of us and all of us together rise to the calling of the hour that this time next year, the people and the state of Israel are closer to security, closer to wholeness, and closer to peace. Shalom. Good Yontif. Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom and see you in Shul.